For decades, the Middle East has been the ultimate testing ground for global power. Every empire that tried to dominate this region has left behind deep scars, from the British and the French to the Soviets and the Americans. But in the 21st century, something very different is happening. The Middle East is no longer a playground for one superpower. It's a chessboard with multiple players. And right now, Vladimir Putin seems to be playing the smartest moves. To understand how Russia is suddenly becoming a key player in the Gaza peace process and possibly stealing one of America's most trusted Arab allies, we need to rewind to the Trump era. Because everything that's unfolding now has its roots in Donald Trump's bold, chaotic, and unfinished Middle East vision. When Donald Trump entered the White House in 2017, he made one thing clear: America would no longer fight endless wars. But he also wanted to win geopolitically without sending troops. His strategy? Use deals, not wars. Use money, not missiles. That philosophy gave birth to the Abraham Accords, a series of normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab nations, including the UAE and Bahrain, later supported by Morocco and Sudan. The idea was revolutionary for Washington. Instead of forcing peace between Israel and the Palestinians first, Trump's team, led by Jared Kushner, decided to make peace between Israel and Arab governments around Palestine. The theory was simple but ruthless. Once Israel had friendly ties with the Arab world, Palestinians would be pressured into accepting a peace deal on America's terms. Behind this, Washington was also trying to isolate Iran and secure stronger military and energy partnerships with Gulf monarchies. The U.S. thought it had achieved something historic. American allies in the Gulf were closer to Israel, and the U.S. could step back militarily while keeping control through diplomacy and oil deals. But this grand strategy had one blind spot: Russia. Putin's patience game. While America celebrated the Abraham Accords, Putin was quietly rebuilding his Middle East network. He had already saved Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria back in 2015, re-establishing Russia as a credible regional power. Russian troops and aircraft now had permanent bases on the Mediterranean, something the Soviet Union once dreamed of but never truly achieved. Moscow's message to Arab leaders was subtle: the U.S. uses you for its own politics. Russia respects your sovereignty and never interferes. That line worked. Arab rulers, especially in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, had begun to doubt Washington's reliability after the U.S. failed to protect Saudi oil facilities from Iranian-backed drone strikes in 2019. They saw how quickly Washington could change direction with each new president. Obama courted Iran, Trump isolated it, Biden criticized Saudi Arabia. Russia, by contrast, offered consistency and respect, at least on the surface. Putin knew he couldn't match America's economic power, but he didn't need to. His strategy was asymmetric: build trust, offer military tech, coordinate on oil production, and position Russia as a neutral mediator in regional conflicts, including Palestine. The fragile Gaza peace vision. When Trump left office, the Gaza situation was tense but somewhat stable. His administration had cut aid to Palestinian institutions, moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and recognized Israel's sovereignty over disputed territories. These moves angered the Arab street, but Washington believed that economic deals could override emotional politics. The next step, insiders said, was supposed to be a Gaza development plan, a mix of investments and infrastructure projects that would turn Gaza into a Singapore-style economic zone backed by Gulf money.
It wasn't a humanitarian project, it was a political one, a way to make the Palestinian question manageable for Israel and the US. But that plan quietly died after Trump lost the 2020 election. The Biden administration had different priorities: reviving the Iran nuclear deal, rebuilding ties with Europe, and reducing direct involvement in the Middle East. That vacuum gave Putin the perfect opportunity. Putin's entry point: energy, influence, and neutrality. By 2021, Russia had three major assets in the region: military credibility, thanks to Syria; energy leverage through OPEC+ cooperation with Saudi Arabia; and diplomatic ambiguity, being friends with both Israel and Palestine. This last point is critical. While the US is seen as Israel's unconditional ally, Russia has always maintained direct communication with all sides: Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, and even Iran. It's a position that allows Moscow to act as an acceptable middleman whenever Washington becomes too partisan. In recent years, as tensions in Gaza flared up again, Arab governments began quietly exploring alternatives to an America-dominated peace process. And who stepped forward? Russia. Putin positioned Moscow as a new balancer in the region. Russian diplomats held meetings with Hamas leaders in Moscow, framing it as dialogue rather than endorsement. At the same time, Russia maintained cordial relations with Israel, a rare duality that no other major power could sustain. The world was too distracted by Ukraine to notice that something major was shifting in the Middle East.
As the dust of Trump's presidency settled, America entered a period of strategic confusion. The Biden administration publicly insisted that the United States was back as a global leader, yet its actions told a different story. Washington's focus shifted almost entirely toward containing China in the Indo-Pacific and confronting Russia over Ukraine. The Middle East, once the centerpiece of American diplomacy, quietly slipped down the list of priorities. For the Arab monarchies who had invested their prestige in Trump's Abraham Accords, this neglect was a red flag. Suddenly, their grand partnership with Washington looked uncertain. And this was precisely when Vladimir Putin made his move. The Russian strategy: friendship without moral lectures. The genius of Putin's diplomacy lies in its simplicity. The Kremlin never asks its partners to adopt Western-style democracy, nor does it interfere in their domestic affairs. For Arab rulers who constantly face Western criticism over human rights or political freedoms, this approach feels like a breath of fresh air. While Washington scolds, Moscow smiles. While US envoys warn about values, Russian officials talk about respect. That difference in tone matters. In politics, perception often outweighs reality. When the United States criticized Saudi Arabia's human rights record after the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, Putin did the opposite. He shook hands with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the G20 summit, smiling for cameras in a gesture that symbolized defiance against Western moral superiority. The message was clear: Russia does not judge, Russia deals. The OPEC+ axis. One of the least discussed but most powerful instruments of Russia's influence has been OPEC+, the expanded oil alliance that combines OPEC states like Saudi Arabia with non-OPEC producers, including Russia. Through OPEC+, Moscow and Riyadh coordinate production levels that directly affect global oil prices and, by extension, the health of Western economies. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 and Western sanctions tried to cripple its energy revenues, OPEC+ unexpectedly supported Moscow by keeping oil supplies tight. This angered Washington, but strengthened Moscow's partnership with Riyadh. Behind closed doors, Russian negotiators reminded Saudi Arabia of one thing. You and we, the world, depends on our energy. Together, we control the tap. For the first time in decades, an Arab power felt it could defy Washington without facing immediate punishment. The U.S. could no longer dictate oil policy. The UAE, the new diplomatic wildcard. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates, once considered one of America's most loyal allies, began rebranding itself as a global mediator, echoing Russia's playbook. Abu Dhabi maintained its participation in the Abraham Accords, but also expanded business with Russia, even during Western sanctions. Russian oligarchs moved billions through Emirati financial hubs. Joint ventures flourished in trade, logistics, and technology. The UAE began to see Russia not as a rival, but as a balancing force against American unpredictability. Putin understood this psychological shift perfectly. He knew that Gulf rulers value stability above all. America, with its partisan politics and public moralizing, often looks unstable. Russia, even under sanctions and war, appears consistent. And in diplomacy, consistency breeds confidence. Russia and Egypt, the return of old Soviet ties. If Saudi Arabia and the UAE represent Russia's new partnerships, Egypt represents the revival of an old one. During the Cold War, Egypt was one of the Soviet Union's most important allies. After the 1970s, Cairo switched sides to Washington, becoming one of the largest recipients of U.S. military aid. But in recent years, that loyalty has weakened. Russia built Egypt's first nuclear power plant at El Daba. It offered military hardware without political conditions. And in 2023, when Western investors pulled money out of Egypt's struggling economy, Russia stepped in with new trade and grain deals. By combining military cooperation, food security, and energy infrastructure, Russia created a deep strategic footprint that Washington could not easily uproot. Qatar and the information game. Even Qatar, which often plays an independent role in the Middle East diplomacy, found value in engaging Moscow. Doha hosts Hamas leaders and has channels with both Israel